The chandelier glittered like cold judgment over the mahogany table as my sister's hand cracked across my 10-year-old daughter's cheek. A single drop of lobster bisque slid down Lily's trembling lip, mixing with the red welt blooming on her skin. My mother dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and said nothing. My father stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. 20 relatives froze mid-bite. I felt the room tilt. 10 years of swallowed insults of being the lesser daughter of watching Claire get the praise while I raised the child she abandoned ignited in that slap. I stood so fast the chair screamed against marble. "Touch her again," I whispered, voice low enough to slice steel, and you'll lose more than your pride. I took Lily's hand and walked out. No slammed doors, just the soft click that ended a lifetime. In the car, I opened the offshore app I'd hidden for 6 years. One tap. $15 million. My silent 51% of the family trust vanished from their reach. By midnight, 109 missed calls lit my screen like fireworks. They thought I was broke. They thought I was broken. Keep watching. Because the man they buried 6 months ago isn't dead. The child they shamed is holding the evidence and the fortune they're screaming over. It was never theirs. What happens when a mother finally stops apologizing and starts collecting? Stay until the end for 3 twists that will leave you gasping and the sweetest revenge you'll ever taste. My name is Emily Harper, 35 years old, Vice President of Wealth Management at a mid-tier investment firm in Charlotte. 6 months ago, I signed the divorce papers that ended a 12-year marriage to a man who preferred golf memberships to bedtime stories. And every day since I have been the sole provider, protector, and bedtime tucker for my 10-year-old daughter, Lily. We live in a tidy 2-bedroom townhouse on the edge of Myers Park. Modest by the standards of the neighborhood where I grew up, but ours paid for with my own commissions, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing no one can take it away. The invitation arrived on heavy cream stock. Mom's looping calligraphy announcing a family reconciliation dinner at the old estate on Providence Road. Reconciliation. The word tasted like saccharin on my tongue. For 25 years, I had been the afterthought daughter, the one who studied spreadsheets while Claire studied spotlights. Claire, 3 years older, golden-haired the debutante who could do no wrong. Claire who left for New York after college and returned only when she needed money or applause. Claire who somehow still sat at the head of every holiday table while I was relegated to the kiddie end, even after I was the only one showing up with a child in tow. I remember the first time I understood the hierarchy. I was 8 home from school with a report card full of A+s and a gold star from Mrs. Abernathy for exceptional diligence. Mom glanced at the paper, smiled the thin smile reserved for polite strangers, and said, "That's nice, honey. Did you see Claire's acceptance letter to the Magnet Arts program? She's going to be on the news." Dad ruffled Claire's hair and promised her a new camera. I got a pat on the shoulder and instructions to set the table. That pattern calcified over decades: Claire's art shows, Claire's internships, Claire's engagement to the junior senator's son that never quite materialized, my scholarships, my summa cum laude, my corner office footnotes at best. Still, when the invitation came, I told myself this time might be different. Lily had been asking about her grandparents drawing pictures of a big house with a swimming pool and a grandma who baked cookies. I wanted her to have family beyond the 2 of us and the goldfish named Mr. Bubbles. I ironed her favorite blue dress with the tiny white flowers, the one that made her feel like a princess. And I chose a simple black sheath for myself. Professional understated nothing that could be construed as showing off. In the rearview mirror on the drive over, I caught Lily practicing her curtsy and felt a flutter of hope. Maybe tonight the past would stay in the past. Maybe my parents had finally noticed the empty chair where their younger daughter used to sit in silence. The gates swung open at dusk, wrought iron gleaming under landscape lights that cost more per bulb than my monthly grocery budget. The driveway curved like a red carpet toward the colonial mansion that had once been featured in Southern Living white columns, black shutters, the kind of place where scandals are polished until they shine like silver. Valets in crisp white shirts took my keys with the same deference they showed the Mercedes and Range Rovers already parked in formation. Lily's eyes went wide at the fountain in the courtyard, the marble cherubs spouting water into a pool of floating orchids. "Mommy, it's like Cinderella's castle," she whispered. and I squeezed her hand, willing myself to believe in fairy tales for one evening. Inside the foyer smelled of beeswax and lilies, real ones flown in from Ecuador Mom had once bragged. The grand staircase swept upward like a movie set, and every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that requires staff you never see. Relatives milled about with crystal flutes of champagne, aunts in pearls, uncles in blazers with crests I didn't recognize. Claire held court near the fireplace, laughing too loudly at something a cousin twice removed was saying, her diamond earrings catching the light with every tilt of her head. She wore emerald silk that clung like money, and when she spotted us, her smile sharpened into something that wasn't quite welcome.
"Emily, you made it," she called as if I were the one perpetually late to my own life. "And Lily, my goodness, you've grown.
Come give Aunt Claire a hug." Lily hesitated, pressing closer to my side, but good manners won out. Claire's embrace was theatrical air kisses that never quite landed. Mom appeared at my elbow in a cloud of Chanel No. 5, pressing a cool cheek to mine. "Darling, the dining room is this way. We're so glad you could join us." No apology for the 6 months of silence since the divorce, no questions about how Lily was adjusting to one bedtime instead of two. Just the same polished distance as if I were a guest rather than the daughter who used to ride her bike up this very driveway. Dad stood by the bar, swirling amber liquid in a heavy tumbler. He looked older than I remembered, hair more salt than pepper. Now the lines around his eyes etched deeper. When he saw me, something flickered across his face that might have been regret, but it vanished behind the practiced smile of a man who had spent a lifetime closing deals. "Emily," he said, voice warm but distracted. "Good to see you." He ruffled Lily's hair the way he used to ruffle Claire's, then turned back to his conversation about municipal bonds. Lily looked up at me, confused by the half-second of attention, and I forced a smile that felt like glass. We were seated at the long mahogany table that had hosted governors and philanthropists. Lily, between me and a great-aunt, who smelled of lavender and mothballs. Place cards and calligraphy assigned us to the far end, naturally close enough to be counted, far enough to be ignored. The first course arrived, cream of asparagus soup in delicate bone china, and I watched Lily grip her spoon with both hands, concentrating so hard not to spill. Across from us, Claire launched into a story about her latest gallery opening in Soho, complete with name drops I recognized from the society pages. Mom beamed. Dad nodded approvingly. The aunts leaned in like groupies. I sipped my water and reminded myself why we were here, for Lily, for the possibility of grandparents who might one day send birthday cards without Claire's return address on the envelope. The chandelier above us glittered like a constellation of tiny judgments, casting diamonds of light across the silver and crystal. Outside the tall windows, the garden lights twinkled in practiced symmetry. Everything was perfect, or as close to perfect as money could buy. I allowed myself one deep breath, tasting hope beneath the asparagus and old grudges. Maybe tonight would be the night the script finally changed. Maybe the prodigal daughter had returned, and the steady one would finally be seen. Little did I know that dinner would be the last time I stayed silent. The soup arrived in shallow white bowls rimmed with gold, the kind of dishware that costs more per piece than most people's weekly grocery budget. The server, a young man with the rigid posture of someone who had been trained to disappear, ladled lobster bisque from a silver tureen, the aroma rich with cream and sherry and something faintly oceanic. Dad raised his glass for the toast he insisted on giving at every gathering, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of boardroom speeches. To family, he declared the one investment that never depreciates. Crystal chimed as 20 glasses lifted in unison, the sound bright and brittle. I touched my water to Lily's sparkling cider, watching her small fingers wrap carefully around the stem. She had been practicing this moment in our kitchen for days, tongue between her teeth as she balanced a plastic cup on her palm. Claire, seated directly across from us, leaned forward to clink her champagne flute against Mom's. The movement was graceful, deliberate, the way everything about her always was. Her emerald silk dress caught the chandelier light and threw it back in shards of green fire. The toast rippled down the table like a wave, and when it reached us, Lily stretched on her tiptoes to reach Great Aunt Margaret's glass. Her elbow bumped the soup bowl. Time slowed the way it does in car accidents. The bowl tipped porcelain scraping mahogany with a sound like a fingernail on chalk. Bisque arced through the air in a perfect orange parabola, landing with a wet slap across Claire's lap. The stains spread instantly, dark and obscene against the silk dripping onto the antique Persian rug that Mom had shipped from Isfahan. For one heartbeat, the table held its breath. Lily's face went white beneath her freckles, her mouth forming a perfect O of horror. I reached for her instinctively, my napkin already in motion, but Claire moved faster. She was on her feet so quickly her chair rocked backward, nearly toppling. "You little—" The word she bit off was sharp enough to draw blood. Her hands flew to the fabric fingers, smearing the stain whiter as if rage alone could erase it. "Do you have any idea what this cost?" "More than your mother makes in a month. I guarantee it." The insult landed between us like a thrown gauntlet. I felt it strike my chest hot and precise. Lily shrank against my side, her shoulder pressing into my ribs. "I'm sorry," she whispered the words, barely audible over the sudden roar in my ears. It was an accident. Claire's laugh was a bark, humorless and cutting. "Accident. You're 10 years old, not 2. You're a clumsy burden who shouldn't be allowed near anything nice." The phrase hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. I saw Lily flinch as if each syllable were a separate slap. Around the table, forks paused halfway to mouths. Cousin Eleanor's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. Uncle Richard cleared his throat, the sound wet and uncertain. Mom's fingers tightened around her wine glass until the stem looked ready to snap, but she said nothing. Dad set his tumbler down with exaggerated care, the ice cubes clinking like warning bells. No one moved to comfort Lily. No one told Claire to watch her tongue. The silence stretched thick and suffocating, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. I felt the isolation settle over me, like a shroud. 20 people, 20 pairs of eyes, and not one of them met mine. Not one of them reached across the table to steady my daughter's trembling hand. Lily's breath hitched a small, wounded sound that tore at something deep inside my chest. I remembered every time I had been the one to spill milk, to track mud on the foyer marble, to forget the exact fork for the fish course. I remembered the lectures, the comparisons, the way Claire's mistakes were always creative expressions, while mine were failures of character. History repeating itself, only this time the target was smaller, more vulnerable, and entirely mine to protect. Claire was still talking, her voice rising in pitch and volume, a performance for the captive audience. "Honestly, Emily, if you can't teach her basic manners, maybe you shouldn't bring her to civilized events." The word civilized dripped with venom. She dabbed at her dress with a napkin someone had handed her, the motion frantic and theatrical. "This is couture, from Paris. You wouldn't understand." The dig was meant for me, but it was Lily who absorbed it, her shoulders curling inward as if she could make herself disappear. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend, to demand, but the words stuck behind my teeth. The old patterns were ironclad. Claire spoke. The family listened. I absorbed the fallout. Lily's hand found mine under the table, her fingers ice cold and clammy. She was shaking so hard I could feel it in my bones. The bisque cooled on the rug, the stains spreading like a bruise. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. Still no one intervened. Claire's face twisted into something ugly, the mask of sophistication slipping to reveal the spoiled child beneath. "Look at her," she sneered, gesturing at Lily with the soiled napkin. "Sitting there like she belongs. She's always been a mistake." The word mistake landed like a physical blow. Lily made a small, broken sound, and something inside me snapped with an almost audible crack. I started to rise, my chair scraping backward, but Claire was already moving. Her hand lashed out faster than thought, palm opened, the crack of flesh on flesh echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. And then my sister slapped her, right across the face. The sound of Claire's palm meeting Lily's cheek cracked through the dining room like a starter pistol. And the silence that followed was not the stunned hush of shock, but the deliberate, practiced quiet of a family that had perfected looking away. Lily's head snapped to the side, her fine brown hair whipping across her face, and the welt rose instantly, a livid handprint blooming on skin that had never known anything rougher than a playground scrape. She did not cry out. She made no sound at all, only pressed both hands to her cheek as if she could hold the pain inside, and the sight of that small instinctive gesture carved something raw and permanent out of my chest. I waited for the avalanche of outrage that should have followed. I waited for Dad to slam his fist on the table the way he did when a deal went south. I waited for Mom to gasp and clutch her pearls and demand Claire apologize. I waited for any one of the 20 adults in the room to remember that a child had just been struck in front of them. But the avalanche never came. The only movement was the slow, deliberate lowering of eyes. Forks resumed their careful paths to mouths. Napkins lifted to lips. Uncle Richard reached for the decanter as though nothing had happened. Great Aunt Margaret adjusted her hearing aid with a tiny, satisfied click. Mom stared at her plate, the untouched bisque congealing into a pale orange skin. Her manicured fingers worried the stem of her wineglass, twisting it in quarter turns the way she used to twist the diamond on her right hand whenever Claire missed curfew, and I was sent to bed without dessert. Dad's gaze remained fixed on the silver salt cellar, his jaw working beneath the skin as if he were chewing on words he had no intention of spitting out. The silence stretched thick and toxic until Claire filled it with a brittle laugh. "Well," she said, smoothing her ruined dress, someone had to teach her coordination. Mom's voice came then, soft and apologetic, the tone she reserved for smoothing over Claire's tantrums, since we were children. Claire's stressed, she murmured, barely loud enough to carry past the centerpiece. The gallery opening the investors, "It's been a lot." As if stress were a medical condition that excused violence. As if a 10-year-old's accidental spill justified a public assault. The words landed between us like a dismissal, and I felt the old familiar burn of being erased. I had heard that tone before. I was 12 when Claire decided my science fair volcano was tacky, and poured blue food coloring into the crater the night before the judging. Mom found me scrubbing the carpet at midnight and sighed Claire's under pressure with her art portfolio honey. Let's not make a scene. I was 16 when Claire borrowed my college essay, changed the name at the top, and submitted it to the same scholarship committee. Dad read both versions, frowned, then told me, "Your sister needs this more. You're the practical one, you'll figure something out." I was 22 when Claire totaled Dad's Porsche after a party, and I was the one grounded for not keeping an eye on her. Each time the script was the same, Claire acted, I absorbed, and our parents rewrote history to protect their golden child. The memories flooded in sharp and cinematic. I saw myself at 14 standing in the kitchen doorway while Mom comforted Claire over a B- in algebra, tears streaming down both their faces because the teacher doesn't understand artistic minds. I saw Dad at the country club clapping Claire on the back for making the cheer squad while I sat in the corner with my calculus textbook invisible. I saw the Christmas I was 28, newly promoted to VP, bringing Lily, then 3, to the family brunch. Claire arrived late hungover and announced she was taking a sabbatical in Bali. Mom cooed over her brave spirit while Dad slipped her an envelope thick with cash. I received a polite thank you for the poinsettia centerpiece and a gentle reminder that Lily was getting loud. Under the table, Lily's hand found mine again, her fingers cold and trembling. I curled mine around them, feeling the bird-like bones, the trust that had never wavered, even when mine had cracked. She was shaking so hard the vibration traveled up my arm and settled behind my eyes. I wanted to scoop her up, to shield her with my body, to scream until the crystal shattered. But the old training held me frozen. Good girls don't make scenes practical. Daughters don't disrupt the narrative. The spare air doesn't challenge the chosen one. Claire sat down with a huff, accepting a fresh napkin from the server, as if she were the injured party. Conversation trickled back to life around us, cautious and subdued. Someone asked about the new wing at the art museum. Someone else complimented Mom's floral arrangements. The incident was being folded into the family mythology already. Claire's understandable outburst, Lily's carelessness, my role as the silent caretaker who would clean up the mess. I felt the weight of every unspoken apology I had ever swallowed, every time I had smiled when I wanted to scream, every time I had chosen peace over justice, because it was easier for everyone else.
Lily's breathing hitched a tiny wet sound that only I could hear. I looked down at her hand in mine, at the faint crescent marks her nails had left in her own palm from clenching too hard. Something shifted inside me, a tectonic plate grinding into new alignment. The anger was still there, white-hot and blinding, but beneath it was something colder, clearer. Resolve. Not the frantic, desperate kind that burns out quickly, but the steady, unbreakable kind that carves canyons. I squeezed her fingers once, a promise without words, and felt her squeeze back. Mom finally looked up, her eyes skimming over Lily's reddened cheek without lingering. "Let's have the main course," she said brightly, as if the menu could erase what had happened. The servers materialized with plates of filet mignon arranged like abstract art, and the charade continued. But I was done pretending. The girl who had spent 35 years apologizing for existing was gone, buried beneath the handprint on her daughter's face. In her place was a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the hardwood with a sound that cut through the murmured conversation like a blade. 20 heads turned finally, but I was already standing. Lily looked up at me, eyes wide and trusting, and I gave her the smallest nod. My hand tightened around hers, steady now, unyielding. The room watched in stunned silence as I stepped away from the table, my daughter's small fingers laced through mine like the only lifeline that mattered. I stood up, and I never looked back. The scrape of my chair still rang in my ears as I stepped clear of the table. Lily's small hand locked in mine like a heartbeat I refused to let go. The dining room stretched behind us, a tableau of frozen faces and half-raised forks, but I kept my gaze fixed on the archway that led to the foyer. Each footfall on the polished oak sounded deliberate, final, the way a judge's gavel seals a verdict. Lily's shoes clicked beside mine too fast for her legs, and I slowed just enough to keep her from stumbling. No one rose to stop us. No one shouted. The only protest came from Mom's thin, wavering voice drifting after us like a ribbon cut loose in the wind. "Emily, dear, the entree is coming." Dad's deeper rumble followed, weaker, almost apologetic. "Sit down, sweetheart. We'll sort this out." Their words dissolved into the hum of the air conditioning before we reached the front door. The night air hit us cool and sudden, carrying the scent of boxwood and cut grass. The valet startled when he saw us fumbling for my ticket, but I shook my head and guided Lily down the gravel path to where I had parked beneath the magnolia. The car was a modest silver sedan, nothing like the gleaming SUVs lining the drive, but tonight it felt like a fortress. I opened the back door, and Lily climbed in without a word, buckling herself with the mechanical precision of a child who had learned to manage her own fear. I slid behind the wheel, closed the door, and for the first time since the slap, the world narrowed to the two of us inside this small, safe space. Lily's breathing came in shallow hitches. In the dome light, I saw the mark on her cheek, angry, and raised the perfect outline of Claire's manicured hand. A single tear tracked down, cutting a clean line through the faint dusting of freckles. She stared straight ahead, hands knotted in her lap, and then the dam broke. The sobs were soundless at first shoulders, shaking mouth open in a silent wail that tore at me worse than any scream. I unbuckled, twisted to the back seat, and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face against my neck, hot tears soaking the collar of my dress. "I didn't mean to," she whispered over and over, the words muffled against my skin. "I tried to be careful, Mommy. I really did." I rocked her the way I had when she was 3 and afraid of thunderstorms, my palm stroking the fine hair at the nape of her neck. "Listen to me, baby," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, the tone I used when markets crashed and clients panicked. "You did nothing wrong. Spilling soup is not a crime. What Aunt Claire did, what Grandma and Grandpa allowed, that's on them. Not you. Never you." She clung tighter, her small body trembling with the aftershocks of humiliation. I felt every shudder like a personal failure, every tear a debt I intended to collect. The estate lights receded in the rearview mirror as I eased onto Providence Road, the magnolia petals glowing white under the street lamps. Lily's crying slowed to hiccups, then to the occasional sniffle. I reached for the box of tissues I kept in the console, pressed one into her hand. "Blow," I instructed gently, and she obeyed, the sound comically loud in the quiet car. A shaky laugh escaped her, surprising us both, and I smiled despite the ache in my chest. That laugh, fragile but real, was the first brick in the wall I would build around her from now on. We were 3 miles from the house when I spoke again, this time to myself as much as to her. "No one will ever hurt you like that again, Lily. I swear it on every breath I take." The promise settled between us, heavy and unbreakable. She looked up, eyes still glassy but clearer now, searching my face for the certainty she needed. I gave it to her with a nod, then turned my attention to the road ahead. The city lights blurred past familiar streets that suddenly felt like the opening scene of a new life. While Lily dozed against the window, thumb creeping toward her mouth the way it hadn't since kindergarten, I let my mind shift into the cold, precise channels I used at the office. 6 years ago, when Dad decided to restructure the family trust to streamline taxes, he had asked me to review the documents. I spotted the clause that made me the swing vote, the silent 51% that controlled every disbursement, every investment decision. He had waved it away as boilerplate, trusting my diligence, but never imagining I would weaponize it. Claire had been in Ibiza that month. Mom was planning the charity gala. No one noticed when I quietly consolidated the voting shares under a blind LLC registered in my name alone. $15 million in blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and commercial real estate, all requiring my digital signature to move. They thought the money was theirs to parcel out like party favors. They thought I was content with the annual allowance wired to my account each December, a polite consolation prize for the daughter who chose stability over ambition. I pulled into our garage, the automatic door rumbling shut behind us like a vault. Lily stirred as I lifted her from the seat, her head lolling against my shoulder, limbs heavy with exhaustion. Inside the townhouse, I carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed, still wearing the blue dress with the wilted flowers. She was asleep before her head touched the pillow. I stood in the doorway a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the bruise on her cheek, a dark accusation in the nightlight's glow. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and opened the laptop that held the keys to everything they believed was theirs. The screen lit my face in cold blue. I logged into the trust portal, entered the 2-factor code sent to the burner phone I kept in a locked drawer. The dashboard loaded $15,423,000 and change. One click would initiate the transfer to an irrevocable account in Lily's name, shielded by layers of offshore privacy. Another click would freeze every outgoing wire until I personally approved it. My cursor hovered. I thought of Claire's sneer, Mom's muttered excuse, Dad's averted eyes. I thought of Lily's tear-streaked face and the handprint that would fade long before the memory did. I did not hesitate. The transfer confirmation pinged softly, a sound no louder than a heartbeat, but infinitely more powerful. By morning, the family accountants would notice. By noon, the screaming would start. They thought I had nothing but a modest salary and a divorced woman's pride. They thought the trust was their birthright, my compliance their due. They thought I had nothing. They were wrong. The confirmation email arrived with a soft chime, the kind that could pass for a calendar reminder if you weren't listening for the sound of empires shifting. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. $15,423,812.47 now rested in an account titled only with Lily's initials, and a string of digits no one else would ever decipher. The transfer was complete, irrevocable, routed through 3 jurisdictions and 2 shell entities, before landing in a vault that required my biometric print and a rotating code generated by an app on my phone. I closed the laptop, the click of the lid louder in the quiet house than the transaction itself, and felt the first true breath I had taken since the slap. Lily's door was ajar, the nightlight casting a warm amber glow across her bed. She had kicked off one sock,
her foot dangling over the edge, the bruise on her cheek now a darker purple in the shadows. I stood there longer than I meant to, memorizing the rise and fall of her breathing, the way her fingers curled around the stuffed giraffe she still pretended not to need. The house felt different already, the walls less like a rental and more like a command center. I left her door cracked exactly 3 inches the way she liked it, and descended the stairs with the deliberate calm of someone who had just drawn a line in blood. My office was a converted closet under the stairs, barely large enough for a desk and a single monitor, but it had served as mission control for bigger moves than this. I opened the second laptop, the one never connected to the home Wi-Fi, and navigated to the encrypted drive labeled Legacy. Inside were folders I had built over years of quiet diligence, scanned trust documents, quarterly statements, emails Dad had forwarded without reading the fine print. The family had always treated technology the way they treated me, something to delegate something beneath their notice. They still used the same phone backup service I had set up for them in 2018, back when I was the helpful daughter who fixed printers and recovered deleted photos. The master admin password had never changed. I logged in with the credentials I had memorized, the way other people memorized birthdays. Mom's iPhone appeared first, then Dad's, then Claire's. Each device a glowing node on a digital map. A single toggle enabled remote view. Another activated the microphones. The screen split into 3 live feeds. Mom pacing the foyer. Dad hunched over his study desk. Claire in the powder room dabbing at her ruined dress with a towel that would never salvage silk. Their voices came through tinny but clear overlapping in a frantic symphony of denial. I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and watched the evening unravel in real time. Mom was on the landline with the bank's after-hours line, her voice climbing octaves with every hold music interlude. "No, you don't understand. There must be a glitch. My husband is Charles Harper of Harper Holdings. Check again." Dad had pulled up the trust portal on his desktop, the same one I had just emptied, and I could see his cursor hovering over the refresh button, as if willpower alone could repopulate the balance. Claire stormed into the study phone to her ear, demanding to speak to someone in private wealth management, not the peasant desk. The camera angles caught every angle of their panic, Mom's free hand fluttering to her throat. Dad's forehead slick with sudden sweat. Claire's reflection in the window showing eyes wild with calculations. I had expected satisfaction, the cold thrill of retribution, but what I felt was closer to scientific curiosity. How long until they realized the money hadn't vanished into a hacker's paradise but had simply changed hands? How many times would they refresh before accepting the new reality? I opened a side window and initiated a second transfer. This one smaller surgical, the liquidation of the municipal bonds, into a high-yield account that would mature on Lily's 18th birthday. The confirmation pinged again, softer this time, a punctuation mark on their unraveling. Dad finally noticed the admin alert buried in the trust's activity log, my digital signature time-stamped at 9:47 p.m. His face went the color of old parchment. "Emily," he said the name barely a whisper, as if speaking it too loudly might summon me. Claire snatched the laptop, scrolling frantically, her manicured nails clicking against the trackpad. That little she started, then caught herself perhaps remembering the microphones she didn't know were live. Mom collapsed into the leather wingback, the one Dad had shipped from London, and began to cry in the theatrical way she reserved for charity galas, when the string quartet played something minor. I adjusted the audio feed, isolating Claire's phone call to the family attorney. "I don't care what time it is in Aspen," she hissed. "Wake him up. Tell him the trust has been drained and my sister, my mousy divorced sister, is the only one with access." The attorney's voice came through muffled but calm, the sound of a man who had seen richer families implode over less. "Claire, if Emily holds majority voting rights, there's nothing illegal here. You'll need to prove fraud or coercion." Claire's scream was sharp enough to distort the microphone. "She doesn't have majority." "She can't, but I did." And they were learning it in real time, the way children learn fire is hot by touching the stove.
I watched Dad pour himself a drink with shaking hands, the amber liquid sloshing over the rim. Mom was on her knees now, literally gathering scattered papers from the desk, as if order could be restored by alphabetizing panic. Claire paced like a caged animal, dialing number after number, each call ending with the same stunned silence when the balance was confirmed. The clock on my screen read 10:12 p.m. The dinner had ended hours ago. The guests long gone, but the table in the dining room cam showed the abandoned plates, the congealed sauces, the single overturned chair where I had stood. I zoomed in on the bisque stain, now dried to a rust-colored map on the rug, and felt a grim satisfaction. They would hire cleaners, of course. They would replace the rug. But some stains set permanently. I closed the feeds one by one, the screens winking out like snuffed candles. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the grandfather clock I had salvaged from my grandmother's estate. Tomorrow would bring the calls, the accusations, the inevitable delegation of Claire to handle Emily. Let them come. I had built my fortress brick by digital brick, and tonight I had raised the drawbridge. They checked the accounts. Then the screaming began. The screaming began at the estate the moment the final 0 registered on Dad's screen. A high animal keen from Claire that sliced through the marble corridors and set the crystal sconces trembling. I heard it clearly through the remote feed I had left running in a minimized window, the sound raw and undignified, nothing like the polished laughter that usually filled those rooms. Mom's voice followed frantic and pleading, overlapping Claire's in a duet of panic that would have been comical if it weren't so desperate. Try the Cayman branch again. Mom urged, her words tumbling over each other. Tell them it's an emergency. Tell them Charles Harper is on the line. The bank representative's calm recorded message repeated for the 3rd time something about business hours in Georgetown, and Claire let out a wordless snarl that ended in the unmistakable crash of glass against hardwood. Dad had moved to his study, the heavy oak door, no barrier to the microphone in his phone. I watched him on the split-feed shoulders, hunched, scrolling through transaction logs with the grim focus of a man defusing a bomb. It's not a glitch, he muttered more to himself than to the empty room. Someone has the codes. His fingers drummed the desk, the same rhythm he used when markets tanked, and he needed to think 3 moves ahead. Russian hackers, maybe. Or that kid Claire hired to manage her Instagram. He looked shifty. He opened a new tab, typed in a search for cybersecurity consultants. Charlotte then closed it again, as if the very idea of paying someone to fix this was an insult. Claire burst into the study without knocking, phone still clamped to her ear hair, escaping its chignon in wild strands. The night manager says the transfer originated from a domestic IP, she announced, breathless. Not overseas, not encrypted beyond standard. It's someone who knows the system. Her eyes darted to Dad's screen, then to the family portrait on the wall, the one where I stood slightly behind them, half smiling, always the afterthought. It's her, Claire, said the pronoun dripping venom. It has to be Emily. Who else would be this petty? Dad shook his head, but the doubt had already taken root. I saw it in the way his hand hesitated over the keyboard, in the way he refreshed the portal one more time, as if the money might magically reappear if he just believed hard enough. Mom had migrated to the kitchen, the landline cord stretched to its limit, as she paced between the Sub-Zero and the island where the caterers had arranged the dessert course. No one had touched. Yes, I understand it's after hours in Zurich, she told the international desk, her voice climbing into the register she used when negotiating with florists. But this is $15 million. My daughter-in-law, ex-daughter-in-law, whatever she is now, she's taken everything. The representative's response was inaudible, but Mom's face crumpled. She sank onto a bar stool, the one with the needlepoint cushion Claire had imported from Provence, and began to cry in earnest, the kind of messy, hiccuping sobs that ruined mascara and reputations. My own phone, silenced and face down on the desk, began its silent rebellion. The screen lit with incoming calls, one after another, the names cycling like a roulette wheel. Mom, Mobile, Dad, Cell. Claire. Unknown. Claire again. I let them pile up, each vibration a tiny earthquake against the wood. By 10:47 p.m., the count stood at 43. By 11:12, it was 71. I brewed chamomile tea, I didn't drink, watched the numbers climb, and felt the strange detachment of a general observing troop movements from a distant hill. They were deploying every weapon in their arsenal favors. Threats, guilt, the full spectrum of Harper persuasion, and every missed call was proof that the arsenal was empty. Claire tried a different tactic, texting in all caps. Answer your phone. Then 5 minutes later, this is theft. Then softer, almost pleading. We can fix this. Just come back. I read each message without replying, then deleted the thread. Mom left voicemails in rapid succession, her voice cracking on every syllable. Emily, honey, whatever you think you're doing, stop. We love you. We love Lily. Let's talk. Dad's single text was characteristically terse. Call me. Now. I archived it with the others. At 11:58, the calls slowed as if they had finally exhausted the first wave of outrage. I poured the cold tea down the sink, rinsed the mug, and opened the trust portal one last time to confirm the hold I had placed on all outgoing wires. The balance read 0 across every sub-account, a clean surgical emptiness. I closed the laptop, the house settling around me with the creak of old bones. Lily's breathing drifted down the hallway, steady and deep, the only sound that mattered. My phone buzzed once more, a lone vibration in the quiet. I turned it over, expecting another demand from Claire, but the notification was a voicemail from Dad, timestamped 12:03 a.m. I pressed play volume low, and his voice filled the room rough with exhaustion and something that might have been fear. Emily, he said, pausing as if choosing each word from a limited supply. Come back to the house. We'll talk. Just you and me. No Claire, no Judith. We'll figure this out. Another pause, longer this time, filled with the faint clink of ice in a glass. Please. The message ended with a soft click, the sound of a man who had never begged for anything in his life. I saved the voicemail, labeled it Exhibit A, and powered the phone down completely. The screen went dark, reflecting my face back at me. Calm, unreadable. Outside, the street was empty, the neighbor's porch light flickering in the wind. I stood at the window a long moment, letting the silence settle, letting the weight of what I had done sink in. They would regroup by morning, hire lawyers, trace the transfers, realize the depth of my control. But tonight, they were still reeling, still believing this was a tantrum they could outlast. That night, I had 109 missed calls, and one voicemail that changed everything. The morning after the 109 missed calls, my phone stayed dark, but the silence felt heavier than any ring. I had just poured Lily's cereal when the landline, the one I kept only for school emergencies, rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered on the second tone, expecting a telemarketer. Instead, a measured baritone introduced itself as Martin Caldwell, Dad's estate attorney. Ms. Harper, I need you at the office within the hour. Your father left instructions, and they're time-sensitive. I started to ask what instructions, but he cut me off. Bring identification. And come alone. The line went dead before I could form another question. I dropped Lily at school with a kiss and a promise of pizza for dinner, then drove downtown in a daze. Caldwell's firm occupied the top floor of a glass tower that reflected the city like a mirror. The receptionist waved me straight through to a conference room paneled in dark walnut. Caldwell stood when I entered, silver-haired and immaculate, the kind of lawyer who billed by the heartbeat. He didn't offer coffee. He slid a thick folder across the table and opened it to a single page. Your father executed this codicil 6 months ago, he said. It supersedes every prior trust instrument. You are the sole beneficiary of the Harper estate, liquid and real. Effective immediately. I stared at the signature. Dad's familiar scrawl dated the day before he vanished. There's more, Caldwell continued, voice dropping. Your father left everything to you, and he's alive. The room tilted. I gripped the table edge, certain I had misheard. Caldwell pressed a button on a remote, and a panel in the wall slid aside to reveal a screen. Grainy security footage filled it, the dining room from last night, the bisque spill, Claire's hand rising the slap. My stomach lurched. Caldwell froze the frame on Lily's shocked face. "He's been watching," the lawyer said quietly. "From the Lake Villa. Nanny cams in every room routed to a private server." Before I could process, the conference door opened and Dad walked in. He looked thinner, hair gone almost white, but the eyes were the same steel gray that had once closed seven-figure deals before breakfast. He wore a plain navy sweater, no tie, no watch, nothing to announce the man who used to command boardrooms. "Hello, Em," he said, voice rough from disuse. He didn't hug me. We had never been a hugging family. Instead, he pulled out the chair beside me and sat folding his hands like we were negotiating terms. "I owe you an explanation. 6 months earlier, he told me he and Mom had argued over Claire's latest demand, another $500,000 to rescue a failing pop-up gallery in Miami. Dad had refused. Claire threatened to sell her shares in the family real estate partnership. Mom sided with Claire as always. That night, Dad packed a single bag, drove to the Lake Villa an hour north, and simply disappeared. No note, no body, just the assumption of a heart attack on the golf course. The family held a memorial, scattered empty ashes in the garden, and moved on to counting inheritances. "I wanted to see what they'd do without me," he said. "Who they'd become." He had watched everything through the cameras he installed years ago, back when Claire was sneaking boys into the pool house. He saw the favoritism calcify, saw Mom rewrite history to protect Claire's image, saw me swallow every slight. And last night he saw the slap. That was the line he said, voice cracking for the first time. "I drew it the day you were born, but I let them erase it. No more." He pushed a second document across the table, a custody affidavit signed and notarized. "Lily is yours, legally, irrevocably. Claire relinquished rights the day she handed the baby to you and flew to Europe. I have the hospital records, the texts, the airline manifests. No court will touch it." I stared at the pages at the man who had been dead for half a year and was now rewriting my daughter's future. "Why now?" I asked. He looked at me straight. "Because you finally stood up, and because I'm tired of being the ghost in my own house." Caldwell cleared his throat. "The transfer you executed last night is legal under the codicil. The Lake Villa, the beach house, the brokerage accounts, everything is already in your name. Your mother and sister have no claim." Dad nodded. "They'll fight. They always do. But they'll lose." He reached into his pocket and produced a small flash drive. Every camera feed since March, including Claire admitting she never wanted the child. "Use it however you need." His hand covered mine, brief but firm. "I should have done this years ago. I'm sorry it took a slap to wake me up." The apology hung between us, simple and devastating. I felt the weight of decades shift, the scales finally tipping. Caldwell gathered the folders. "I'll file the probate acceleration this afternoon. You'll have full control by end of week." Dad stood, joints creaking. "I'm staying at the villa until this settles. You and Lily should come for the weekend. There's a tire swing she'll love." He paused at the door. "I'm proud of you, Em. Always was. Just too stubborn to say it." Then he was gone, the door closing with the soft finality of a vault. I sat alone in the walnut-paneled room, the custody papers warm under my palm, the flash drive a grenade in my pocket. The man they buried was alive, the fortune they mourned was mine, and the child they discarded was protected by law. I didn't just have money. I had Dad in legal custody. The flash drive burned a hole in my pocket all the way home, its plastic casing warm against my thigh as I navigated the quiet streets. I replayed Dad's words in a loop. His apology, the custody papers, the tire swing, until they felt less like a dream and more like ammunition. Lily was already asleep when I slipped inside her bedroom door. Still cracked 3 inches, the giraffe tucked under her chin. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to her breathe, then locked the drive in the safe behind the false panel in my closet. The house felt different now, less like a refuge, and more like a bunker, every shadow a potential breach. At 11:47 p.m., the doorbell rang, 3 sharp chimes that sliced through the silence like a scalpel. I knew who it was before I reached the peephole. Claire stood on the porch under the motion light hair loose, and tangled the emerald dress replaced by yoga pants and an oversized sweater that swallowed her frame. Mascara tracked down her cheeks in black rivers, her eyes red-rimmed and frantic. She raised her fist to knock again, but I opened the door first, blocking the threshold with my body. "It's midnight," I said, voice flat. "Lily's sleeping." She tried to push past me the way she used to barge into my room when we were teenagers, and she wanted the good headphones. I didn't budge. "Let me in, Emily," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder as if the neighbors might be watching. "We need to talk. Now." I stepped aside just enough for her to enter, then closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. The foyer light was off. Only the glow from the kitchen spilled across the hardwood, catching the glitter of dried tears on her face. She looked smaller than I remembered the golden girl stripped of her spotlight. Claire paced the narrow space between the console table and the stairs, her bare feet silent on the rug. "You've destroyed everything she started," voice trembling with accusation. "The trust, the gallery mom's blood pressure. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I said nothing, letting her words bounce off the walls. She stopped, wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm under so much stress, Em. The investors pulled out last week, the space in Chelsea is gone, and then tonight that little brat spills soup on a dress that cost more than your car." The word brat landed like a match in dry grass. I felt the heat rise, but I kept my voice level. "Go on," I said. "Tell me how stressed you are." She missed the danger in my tone, too wrapped in her own narrative. "I didn't mean to hit her, okay? It just happened. She's always in the way. Always needing. Always ruining things. If you'd taught her some basic coordination, none of this would have happened." She was crying again, the tears real this time, but they didn't move me. I had seen her cry on cue since we were children, the performance perfected for maximum sympathy. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed to the audio file Dad had flagged from the nanny cam. Claire's voice filled the foyer, tinny but unmistakable. "You're a clumsy burden who shouldn't be allowed near anything nice." Then the crack of the slap, sharp as a gunshot. Lily's small, wounded gasp followed. I let it play to the end, then hit repeat. Claire's face went white beneath the smeared makeup. "Turn it off," she whispered. I didn't. The loop ran again, the sound of her own cruelty echoing off the walls. She lunged for the phone, but I held it out of reach. "You want to talk about stress?" I asked. "Listen to what stress sounds like when it's aimed at a 10-year-old. She sank to her knees right there on the rug, the one Lily had picked out because it had tiny yellow flowers. "Please," she said, the word breaking. "I'll apologize. I'll pay for therapy, whatever she needs. Just give me back my daughter." The confession hung between us, raw and ugly. I had known, of course suspected, since Lily's eyes turned the exact shade of Claire's at certain angles, but hearing it aloud was a different kind of wound. Claire reached for my hand, fingers cold and trembling. "She's my daughter, Em. You can't take her from me." I looked down at her, at the sister who had everything and still wanted more. "You gave her up the day you boarded that plane to Paris," I said. "You signed the papers, you sent the checks, you called her Emily's project. She's been mine for 10 years. You don't get to claim her now because the money's gone." Claire's sobs turned ugly snot mixing with mascara, but I felt no pity. I crouched so we were eye level. "You hit her. You called her a burden. You don't get to kneel here and rewrite history." She clutched at my sleeve. "I'll do anything. I'll leave the city. I'll stay away. Just don't take her." I stood, stepping back until her hand fell away. "It's not up to me anymore," I said. "Dad's alive. He saw everything. The custody affidavit is filed. Lily is legally mine, and you are legally nothing to her." Claire's mouth opened, closed, no sound coming out. I opened the door, the night air rushing in cool and final. "Go home, Claire. Sleep in the bed you made." She knelt. But I wasn't done. I closed the door on Claire's crumpled form and leaned against it until the sound of her retreating footsteps faded into the night.
The house settled around me, the clock in the hallway ticking like a heartbeat I finally controlled. Sleep came in fragments haunted by the echo of her plea, and the weight of the flash drive still locked in the safe. By morning, Dad's text arrived Church Hall. Noon. Bring Lily. No explanation, just the address of the community center where Harper funerals and golden anniversary parties had been held for 3 generations. I dressed Lily in her favorite yellow sundress, the one that made her feel brave, and told her we were going to a family meeting where truth would finally have its say. The parking lot was already full when we arrived. Luxury sedans lined up like soldiers at attention. Inside the hall, folding chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, facing a plywood podium, the same setup used for eulogies and toasts. 50 relatives filled the seats. Aunts in pastel cardigans. Uncles loosening their ties. Cousins whispering behind programs printed with the family crest. Mom sat front row center spine, straight lips pressed into a bloodless line. Claire was beside her, eyes swollen, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. Dad stood at the podium, thinner than I remembered from yesterday, a manila folder thick as a phone book under his arm. He nodded once when he saw us, a silent signal to take the 2 empty chairs reserved on the aisle. The room hushed as Dad tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal brief but sharp. "Thank you for coming on short notice," he began, voice steady despite the tremor in his left hand. 6 months ago, I walked away to see what this family would become without me. What I saw broke something I didn't know could still break. He opened the folder, pulled out a stack of documents, and laid them on the podium like evidence in a trial. Today we settle accounts. All of them. He started with the trust, projecting the transfer confirmation onto the pull-down screen behind him, my digital signature glowing in bold. Gasps rippled through the rows. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Claire leaned forward as if she could will the numbers back. Dad let the silence stretch, then moved to the next slide. Hospital records faded but legible, dated 10 years ago. Claire Harper, age 17, delivered a female infant at Charlotte Memorial, he read aloud. Complications minor. Mother declined to hold child. Claire's face went the color of ash. Mom stared straight ahead, unblinking. Dad clicked again. DNA results, 2 graphs side by side. The child, Lily Harper, is the biological daughter of Claire Harper and an unnamed donor. The woman who has raised her, Emily Harper, is genetically the aunt. He paused, letting the words settle. But there's more. Another slide, a birth certificate, Claire's signature scrawled across the bottom, relinquishing all parental rights. Beside it, a notarized affidavit from Mom dated the same week, authorizing me to adopt for the sake of family reputation. The room erupted in murmurs, chairs creaking as people leaned toward neighbors. Mom stood, legs unsteady. "Charles, this is private," she said, voice cracking. Dad shook his head. "Not anymore." He turned to me. "Tell them, Em." I rose, Lily's hand warm in mine, and faced the sea of faces that had ignored us for a decade. "Claire got pregnant at 17, I said. Mom decided a scandal would ruin the Harper name. Claire wanted to study abroad, to live unencumbered. I had just graduated, was offered a job in Charlotte. Mom flew to Paris with Claire, arranged the adoption through a lawyer who owed Dad favors. I signed the papers in a hospital room while Claire was already on a plane to Provence. Claire shot to her feet. "You wanted her?" she shouted. "You begged to keep her." I met her eyes. "I begged to keep the baby you abandoned in a bassinet with a note that said, 'Figure it out.'" Mom sank back into her chair, hands covering her face. Dad clicked to the final slide, a photo of Lily at 3 months swaddled in the blanket I had knitted my arms, the only ones around her. Judith Harper. Dad said, voice soft, but carrying, raised her own grandchild for 10 years and let the world believe Emily was an unwed mother. She enforced the lie to protect Claire's future. The confessions spilled from Mom, then halting and broken. Claire was going to lose everything, the scholarships, the invitations, the life we built. Emily was practical, steady. She agreed to help. She looked at me, eyes pleading.
You were always the one who fixed things. I felt Lily squeeze my fingers, her small body pressed against my side. I fixed your mistake, I said, and you let Claire hit her for it. Dad closed the folder. The trust is Emily's. The custody is Emily's. The truth is ours. He stepped down from the podium, walked to Lily, and knelt so they were eye level. You're safe, sweetheart. Forever. The room was silent except for Mom's quiet sobbing and the rustle of programs as people processed the unraveling of a decade's deception. Grandma raised her own grandchild. The room gasped. The gasps in the church hall had barely faded when Dad's phone buzzed with a text from the family attorney settlement conference scheduled for tomorrow, my terms only. I felt the room's collective stare shift from shock to calculation. Relatives weighing how the new truth might affect their own invitations to the lake villa. Lily tugged my sleeve, whispering she needed the bathroom, and I used the excuse to step into the vestibule, needing air that wasn't thick with Harper history. Dad followed, pressing a folded note into my hand. Your move now, it read. Make it count. I knew exactly what he meant. By the time we reached home, the note had become a plan. I texted Mom and Claire separately, one chance to apologize on camera scripted by me, posted publicly, or the nanny cam footage of the slap goes to every news outlet in the Carolinas. Mom replied within minutes. We'll do it. Claire took 3 hours and arrived at my door with a lawyer in tow demanding edits. I sent the lawyer away with a copy of the custody order and told Claire the script was non-negotiable. She agreed only after I played the audio of her calling Lily a mistake again. We met the next afternoon in the sunroom of the estate, the one with the wicker furniture and the view of the rose garden Mom still pretended to tend. I set up my phone on a tripod disguised as a decorative plant stand, the lens angled to catch both women against the French doors. Dad sat off-camera, arms crossed, a silent referee. I handed them the printed apologies, single-spaced, no room for improvisation. Mom wore pearl gray hair, perfect even in defeat. Claire had chosen black as if attending her own funeral. I hit record and stepped out of frame. Mom began, first voice trembling but audible. To my granddaughter Lily and my daughter Emily, I offer my deepest apology for the lies I enforced and the pain I caused. I prioritized reputation over family and allowed harm to a child who deserved only love. She paused, eyes glassy, then continued exactly as written. I was wrong to hide Lily's parentage, and wrong to stand silent when violence occurred under my roof. Claire's turn came next, her delivery stilted, each word dragged across gravel. I apologized to Lily for striking her, and for every moment I failed her as her biological mother. I relinquish all claim and accept the consequences of my actions. She stumbled on the last line, I am sorry, but I let the take run. When they finished, I stopped the recording, saved the file, and emailed it to myself from the phone. Mom reached for a tissue. Claire stared at the floor. Dad gave me a slight nod, the closest he came to pride. I told them the video would post at 6 p.m., to the Charlotte Moms Facebook group 30,000 members strong, and that any attempt to suppress it would trigger the nanny cam release. They left without protest, Mom's shoulders rounded Claire's heels, clicking a defeated rhythm down the driveway. At 5:58 p.m., I opened the group on my laptop, uploaded the file with the title, Public Apology from Judith and Claire Harper, and hit share. I had seeded the group weeks earlier with a burner account posting playground tips and school fundraisers until I blended into the feed. The video appeared innocently between a lost cat notice and a recipe for pimento cheese. By 6:12, the first comment appeared, Is this the gallery, Claire? By 6:30, the view counter hit 2,000. I refreshed every minute, watching the numbers climb like a fever. At 7:03, the first boycott call went out, a local boutique owner tagging Claire's gallery page. Will not support businesses tied to child abuse. By 8, the gallery's Instagram was flooded with 1-star reviews, screenshots of the apology circulating like wildfire. A prominent food blogger with 100,000 followers posted, canceling my sponsorship with Harper Art Space. Violence against children is never stress. The gallery's website crashed under traffic. I sat back, tea cooling beside me, and let the internet do what decades of family loyalty never could. By midnight, the video had breached the group's walls, reposted to Twitter, then TikTok, then the local news subreddit. A producer from Channel 9 called my burner number, left a voicemail requesting comment. I didn't return it. At 2:17 a.m., the view counter rolled past 100,000, the algorithm's final mercy. Claire's business partners began pulling out emails, pinging my inbox with subject lines like, "Immediate termination of contract." Mom's Garden Club removed her from the spring tour roster. The Harper name, once a key to every door in Charlotte, had become a warning label. I closed the laptop and checked on Lily. Her breathing steady, the bruise on her cheek fading to yellow. The apologies were public now, irreversible, the first crack in the facade they had built over my life. I had pressed record, yes, but the leak had taken on a life of its own, fed by strangers who recognized cruelty when they saw it. But who pressed record? The morning after the video crossed 100,000 views, I woke to the smell of burnt toast and Lily's small voice humming in the kitchen. She had insisted on making breakfast alone, a ritual she started after the divorce, as if feeding me proved she could keep us both safe. I found her standing on her stepstool, spatula in hand, the smoke alarm beeping its polite warning. She beamed when she saw me, cheeks flushed with pride. I flipped them without breaking the yolks, she announced, sliding 2 perfect sons onto my plate. I kissed the top of her head and pretended not to notice the faint yellow shadow still lingering on her cheek. We ate in companionable silence, the radio murmuring about weekend farmers markets, the world outside our window pretending normalcy, while the internet finished its work. School drop-off was uneventful. Lily waved from the curb, backpack bouncing the bruise hidden beneath a stripe of sunscreen I had applied with surgical care. I spent the morning fielding emails from reporters and distant cousins who suddenly remembered my existence. By noon, my inbox overflowed with interview requests and veiled threats from Claire's remaining sponsors. I archived them all, then drove to the grocery store for ingredients. I didn't need anything to keep my hands busy, and my mind from replaying the sunroom apologies on loop. The cashier recognized me from a viral screenshot and asked if the gallery lady was really my sister. I smiled, scanned my club card, and said nothing. At 2:30, my phone buzzed with a call from Lily's teacher, Mrs. Delgado. Her voice warm but careful. "Emily, could you stop by after dismissal? Lily shared something in writer's workshop I think you should see." My stomach dropped, visions of tear-stained pages and counselor referrals flashing through my mind. I arrived early, parked beneath the sprawling oak that shaded the pickup lane, and watched children spill out in waves of neon backpacks and untied shoelaces. Lily spotted me and ran over, cheeks pink from recess, clutching a spiral notebook decorated with unicorn stickers. "Mrs. D said I could show you at home," she whispered, eyes bright with a secret. We sat in the multi-purpose room that smelled of crayons and industrial cleaner. Mrs. Delgado, a patient woman with kind eyes and a lanyard full of flare pins, slid the notebook across the table. "We've been working on personal narratives," she explained. "Lily asked to read hers aloud today. It's powerful." She opened to a dog-eared page covered in Lily's careful cursive, the letters round and deliberate. "Go ahead, sweetheart," the teacher encouraged. Lily took a breath, stood straighter, and began. "The night of the fancy dinner," she read, voice clear despite the slight tremor. "I wore my blue dress with flowers, and Mommy said I looked like a princess. Grandma's house had a fountain and tiny soaps shaped like seashells. Aunt Claire told a story about paintings in New York, and everyone laughed except me because I didn't get the joke. Then I reached for my glass and my elbow hit the soup. It went all over Aunt Claire's pretty green dress. She got really mad and yelled that I was a clumsy burden. Grandma looked at her plate. Grandpa looked at his phone. Nobody said stop when Aunt Claire's hand went up and came down on my face. It stung like bees and I tasted salt. I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to be there at all. She paused, turning the page, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Mrs. Delgado's hand rested lightly on Lily's shoulder, steadying. Lily continued, softer now. Mommy stood up so fast her chair made a loud noise. She took my hand and we walked out past all the big people who didn't look at us.
In the car, she hugged me until I stopped shaking. She said nobody would ever hurt me again, and I believed her because Mommy always tells the truth. She is my safe place even when the world is loud. That night I fell asleep in my flower dress and dreamed of a castle where only nice people live. Mommy saved me. The last sentence hung in the room like a blessing. Mrs. Delgado's eyes were wet. Mine were suddenly burning. Lily closed the notebook and looked up uncertain. "Is it okay, Mommy?" I couldn't speak, so I pulled her into my lap, burying my face in her hair that smelled of strawberry shampoo and playground dust. Mrs. Delgado slid a box of tissues across the table without comment. When I finally found my voice, it was thick. "It's beautiful, baby. Thank you for trusting me with your words." Lily relaxed against me, the tension easing from her small frame. We thanked the teacher and walked to the car hand in hand, the notebook tucked under my arm like contraband treasure. I buckled Lily into her booster, then sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard until the world blurred. The tears came then, hot and sudden, sliding down my cheeks in silent streams. I cried for the little girl who had cataloged every detail of her pain with the precision of a scientist, for the mother who had almost been too late for the decade I had spent convincing myself silence was strength. But beneath the grief was something fiercer, a renewable fire. Lily's words had named me savior, and in doing so had handed me the armor I needed to finish what I started. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, started the engine, and glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was drawing on the fogged window a stick-figure castle with two figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. The bruise was nearly gone, but the story would stay. I drove home slowly, letting the suburbs roll past in their orderly greens and whites, every mailbox a reminder that ordinary lives held extraordinary battles. Lily hummed the tune from Breakfast off key, but happy, and I felt the last fragment of doubt dissolve. Whatever came next, lawyers' headlines, Claire's inevitable counterattack, we would face it together. I parked in the garage, helped Lily out, and carried the notebook inside like a sacred text. She ran to the kitchen for a snack, already chattering about tomorrow's art project. I stood in the hallway a long moment, thumb tracing the unicorn sticker on the cover, then opened to the final page. Beneath the entry, she had read in smaller secret letters, Lily had added one more line written after lights out when the house was quiet and her thoughts were loudest. And Lily wrote one line I'll never forget. I tucked the notebook under my arm and followed Lily into the kitchen, where she had already climbed onto the counter to reach the cookie jar shaped like a smiling pig. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, catching the dust motes in lazy spirals, and for a moment, everything felt almost ordinary. She offered me a chocolate chip cookie with solemn ceremony, and I accepted it like a treaty. We ate standing up, crumbs falling onto the tile, her legs swinging from the stool. "Mommy," she said around a mouthful, "can we listen to my watch?" "It has a secret button." I laughed, thinking she meant the music app I had loaded with her favorite playlists, but she was already unclasping the pink band from her wrist. The smartwatch had been her 10th birthday gift, chosen after weeks of research into models with parental controls and emergency SOS. I had programmed it to ping my phone if she wandered more than 50 yards, to filter calls to approved numbers, to play audiobooks when nightmares struck. What I had not noticed in the flurry of setup and the chaos that followed was the always-on voice memo feature, buried in the settings, a safety tool meant for lost children to record messages for rescuers. Lily pressed the crown twice, then swiped to a folder labeled Lily's Secrets. The screen filled with audio files, each time stamped, each thumbnail a tiny waveform frozen mid-sentence. She scrolled with the confidence of a child who had explored every menu. "It started the night of the soup," she explained, matter of fact. I pressed the button by accident when Aunt Claire yelled, and it kept going until I turned it off in the car. The first file was dated the evening of the dinner, 7:42 p.m. She tapped play. Claire's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, tinny but unmistakable. "Clumsy burdens shouldn't be allowed near anything nice." Then the sharp slap. Lily's small gasp, the rustle of fabric as I pulled her away. My cookie turned to ash in my mouth. Lily watched my face, uncertain. "Keep going," I managed. File after file unfolded like a horror reel in miniature. Claire at a family barbecue 3 months ago. "Stop hogging the swing, you selfish little." Mom's voice softer from a visit last Christmas. "Let Claire rest, sweetheart. She's had a long flight." A thud that could only be Lily's shoulder hitting a doorframe. Another file from Easter Claire hissing, "If you ruin one more photo, I swear." 20 recordings in total, each one a pinprick in the balloon of denial I had carried for years. The timestamps marched forward from the spill night, proof that the violence had not been a singular explosion, but a slow burn fed by indifference. I knelt so we were eye level, the watch cradled between us like evidence. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Lily shrugged the gesture too adult for her narrow shoulders. "I thought if I had proof you'd believe me when I said it hurt. Grown-ups always say kids make things up." The simplicity of it gutted me. She had built her own archive, a 10-year-old archivist documenting cruelty, because the adults in her life had taught her trust was conditional. I carried the watch to my office, Lily trailing behind with the solemnity of a deputy. The files transferred to my laptop in seconds, each waveform a jagged mountain range of sound. I opened the metadata, every clip geotagged to the estate, to Mom's garden club luncheons, to the lake house where Claire had cornered Lily behind the boathouse. The physical sounds were the worst. The smack of an open palm against a backpack when Lily forgot to say thank you. The scrape of a chair as she was pushed aside at the piano recital. Mom's silence was its own track, the absence of intervention louder than any shout. Lily climbed into my lap, her warmth grounding me. "Are you mad I recorded?" she asked. I kissed her forehead, tasting salt from dried tears I hadn't realized were mine. "I'm proud," I said. "You protected yourself when no one else did." She relaxed against my chest, the watch now dangling from her wrist like a badge. I saved the files to an encrypted drive, then emailed copies to Dad and the attorney with the subject line Exhibit B, pattern of abuse. The reply came within minutes. "Bring her to the lake this weekend. We end this." I closed the laptop and looked at the child who had outsmarted every adult in her orbit. She had pressed record the night of the spill and never stopped, a quiet act of rebellion wrapped in pink silicone. The evidence was irrefutable, time-stamped, geotagged, a child's truth preserved in digital amber. Claire's apologies. Mom's tears, the viral video, none of it mattered now. The real witness had been wearing the watch all along, her small voice the clearest indictment. My 10-year-old was the real witness. The weekend arrived with a sky the color of tarnished silver, and I packed Lily's overnight bag with the efficiency of a soldier heading to battle. She chattered about the tire swing Dad had promised, oblivious to the storm gathering beyond our driveway. We drove north along the lake road, pine trees closing ranks around the sedan, the smartwatch files burning a virtual hole in my cloud drive. The villa appeared at the end of a gravel lane, smaller than the estate, but no less imposing. Its cedar shingles weathered to a soft gray. Dad waited on the porch, coffee mug in hand, looking more like a retired fisherman than the architect of our family's reckoning. He hugged Lily first, lifting her high enough to make her squeal, then turned to me with a nod that carried the weight of unfinished business. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and lemon polish. Lily ran off to explore the loft, her footsteps thundering overhead, and Dad led me to the study that overlooked the water. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting shadows across a desk buried in paper. He closed the door with a soft click and gestured to the leather chair opposite his. "Sit," he said. "This one's uglier than the rest." He opened a locked drawer and withdrew a stack of bank statements bound with rubber bands, the kind of documents that arrive in plain envelopes and disappear into shredders. The top page bore the logo of a private lender in the Caymans, the balance circled in red, $2,143,000 payable immediately. He spread the statements across the blotter like a deck of cards. "Your mother and Claire have been borrowing against the real estate partnership for 4 years, he explained. Art installations, pop-up galleries, a penthouse in Miami they swore was an investment.
When the partnership equity ran dry, they needed collateral. He slid a promissory note toward me, the signature line filled with a forgery so precise it made my skin crawl. My name, my looping E, the slant of the Y I had perfected in college. "They practiced on your old Christmas cards," he said, voice flat. Traced it until it was perfect. I traced the counterfeit loops with a fingertip, feeling the paper's slight ridge where the pen had pressed too hard. The loan was secured against the commercial properties. I now controlled the ones that generated the rental income, keeping Mom's garden club afloat and Claire's lifestyle intact. Another page detailed a second mortgage on the beach house, again with my forged endorsement. The total exposure sat at just over $2 million, a sum that would wipe out every liquid asset they had left and leave the properties vulnerable to foreclosure. Dad watched my face, waiting. "They plan to pay it back with the trust distributions," he said. "Distributions that no longer exist." Lily's laughter drifted down from the loft, a bright counterpoint to the darkness settling in my chest. I flipped through the statements, each one a betrayal in black and white. "How did you find this?" I asked. He tapped a flash drive beside the pile. "The lender got nervous when the trust went dark. They called me thinking I was still in the ground. I flew down, signed as executor, and pulled everything." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "The forgery is felony level M. Federal if they cross state lines. I'll testify. The attorney's ready to file Monday if you say the word." I stared at the fire, watching flames devour a log with patient hunger. Pressing charges meant criminal records, public trials. The Harper name dragged through tabloids, already feasting on the apology video. It meant Mom in an orange jumpsuit, Claire's freedom traded for a plea deal. It meant Lily reading headlines about her grandmother and biological mother in prison orange. Dad read my silence. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "But the clock's ticking. The lender wants payment or property. Your property." He stood, moved to the window where the lake stretched flat and black under the clouds. "I enabled this," he said back to me. "Every time I wrote a check to keep Claire afloat, every time I let Judith rewrite the rules. This is my mess too." His reflection in the glass looked older, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by 6 months of watching his family cannibalize itself. Lily's voice called from upstairs, asking if the tire swing was ready, and Dad's shoulders lifted with the sound. "She deserves better than what we gave her," he said. "Better than what they're still trying to take." I gathered the statements, the forged notes, the lender's demand letter, and slid them into the folder he provided. The weight of it was physical, a brick in my lap. Dad turned, met my eyes. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you. Testimony, settlement, or burning it all down. Your call." He left me alone with the fire and the files. The crackle of wood, the only sound, until Lily's footsteps thundered down the stairs. She burst in, cheeks flushed, demanding to show me the tree fort Dad had built in his absence. I followed her outside, the folder tucked under my arm, the decision simmering like coals. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the guest room with the slanted ceiling, I sat on the dock with the folder open on my knees. The lake lapped gently at the pilings, each wave a reminder that water finds every crack. The statements glowed under the porch light, my forged signature a taunt. Dad's offer echoed testimony, prison, the final severance. I traced the numbers again, calculating interest, penalties, the cost of mercy versus the price of justice. The knife was in my hand, now sharp and balanced, forged from their own deceit. I held the knife that would end them. I stood on the dock long after the moon climbed above the pines. The folder of forged debts balanced on my knee like a loaded weapon. The decision crystallized somewhere between the lapping water and Lily's distant snoring through the open window. No charges, no prison, but no mercy either. They would lose everything the way they had tried to take everything from us publicly, irrevocably, in the one place they still believed was theirs. I texted Mom at dawn, reconciliation dinner estate, 7 sharp, Lily and I will attend. She replied with a single thumbs-up emoji, the closest she came to hope. The day passed in deliberate calm. I dressed Lily in the same yellow sundress from the church hall,
braided her hair with the ribbon she chose herself, and packed the smartwatch in a velvet pouch. Dad met us at the villa gate, his pickup loaded with a projector and a laptop I recognized from his study. We drove in convoy, the lake road giving way to the manicured suburbs, the estate looming at the end like a stage set for the final act. Valets waved us through. The driveway was already crowded with cousins and board members invited under the guise of healing. Mom had spared no expense string quartet in the foyer, ice sculptures melting into swan-shaped puddles. The dining room table extended to seat 30. We entered to a hush that felt rehearsed. Mom stood at the head in sapphire silk, Claire beside her in mourning black. Both women pale, but composed. Place cards positioned Lily and me at the far end, again a subtle reminder of hierarchy. Dad took the seat to my right, his presence a silent declaration. The first course arrived, chilled cucumber soup in crystal bowls, and conversation tiptoed around the elephant in the room. Mom raised her glass for a toast to new beginnings, her voice trembling only slightly. I waited until every spoon touched porcelain, then stood. The projector hummed to life behind the chandelier, its beam cutting through the candlelight to splash the far wall with the first slide, the smartwatch waveform timestamp, 7:42 p.m., the night of the spill. I pressed play on the laptop. Claire's voice filled the room. Tinny but unmistakable. Clumsy burden who shouldn't be allowed near anything nice. The slap cracked like gunfire. Lily's gasp followed small and wounded. The quartet faltered mid-note. A cousin dropped her fork. Mom's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood. I let the file loop once, twice the sound of violence echoing off the crown molding, until Claire's face crumpled. I advanced the slide. Bank statements bloomed across the wall, red circles around the forged signatures, the $2 million balance glowing like a verdict. These loans, I said voice steady, were secured against properties I now own. The collateral is mine to call. Claire lunged for the laptop, but Dad caught her wrist. Sit! He ordered, the tone he once used to close hostile takeovers. The room froze. I clicked again. The final image, the custody order, Lily's name in bold, my signature witnessed by the court. Lily is mine, I said. Legally, permanently. You have no claim, no voice, no visitation. Mom found her feet, hands pressed to the table as if it might steady the world. Emily, please, she whispered. We can fix this. I met her eyes, saw the plea, the calculation, the lifetime of choosing Claire. You said I had nothing, I told her, loud enough for every guest to hear. Look again. I took Lily's hand, felt Dad's solid presence at my shoulder, and walked the length of the table. The quartet had stopped entirely. The only sound was the click of my heels and Lily's smaller ones beside me. Claire reached out as we passed, fingers brushing air. Mom sank back into her chair, the sapphire silk pooling around her like spilled ink. We reached the foyer, the front door open to the night. I paused on the threshold, looked back once. The projector still cycled through the evidence, the smartwatch audio now on its third loop, the slap reverberating endlessly. Mom's sob broke free, then raw and guttural, the sound of a woman watching her empire dissolve in real time. Dad followed us out, pulling the door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. The door closed. Mom's sob echoed forever. The echo of Mom's sob followed us down the driveway, a sound that should have faded with distance, but clung to the night air like damp smoke. Dad drove in silence, the projector and laptop stowed in the trunk, Lily asleep against my shoulder before we reached the highway. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one a small sun dying in sequence, and felt the final threads snap. The estate, the table, the chandelier that had witnessed every slight, all of it receded into a past I no longer owed. By the time we crossed the county line, the plan was fully formed. Vanish, rebuild. Leave, no forwarding address. The next morning, I activated new phones under a trust name Dad had prepared months earlier, numbers unlinked to any Harper account. I listed the townhouse with a realtor who specialized in discreet sales cash offers, only no open houses. The agent raised an eyebrow at the speed but asked no questions when the check cleared. Within a week, the sold sign went up and I began packing in methodical layers Lily's artwork first, then the kitchen gadgets we actually used, finally the clothes that fit the life we were stepping into. I donated the rest to a shelter downtown, the one where I had once volunteered incognito, and watched the boxes disappear into a truck bound for women starting over. Lily helped choose our destination from a map spread across the kitchen table, her finger tracing interstates like rivers. She settled on a small city in Tennessee, 3 states west, with a public elementary ranked top in the region, and a downtown square that hosted farmers markets every Saturday. "They have a duck pond," she said, eyes bright, and a library with a real castle turret. I booked a rental house site, unseen, a craftsman bungalow with a porch swing and a yard big enough for the tire swing Dad promised to ship. The moving company arrived at dawn, professionals who wrapped furniture in quilts and labeled boxes with military precision. By noon, the townhouse was empty, echoing a shell I locked behind me without looking back. We drove west in Dad's pickup, Lily reading billboards aloud and inventing stories about the cows we passed. The new phones stayed silent. I had blocked every number from our old life except Dad's. He met us at the state line with a trailer holding the few pieces I couldn't part with Lily's baby book. My grandmother's cedar chest, the kitchen table where we had eaten burnt toast and planned revolutions. The bungalow welcomed us with the scent of fresh paint and possibility. Lily claimed the bedroom with the slanted ceiling, immediately hanging her unicorn poster above the bed. I enrolled her in the Castle Turret School, where the principal greeted us with lemonade and a welcome packet thick with calendars. The first fire we built was in the backyard pit, a modest circle of bricks the previous tenant had left behind. I gathered the photographs I had carried for years, Claire and me at 8 and 11 arms around each other at the beach. Mom's garden club portraits. Dad's 60th birthday with the cake shaped like a golf green. One by one, I fed them to the flames, watching faces curl and blacken, the past reduced to ash that lifted on the night breeze. Lily added her own contribution, a crayon drawing of the estate with a giant red X through the dining room. "Goodbye means soup," she declared, and the paper flared bright before collapsing into embers. We roasted marshmallows until our fingers were sticky, the smoke carrying away the last ghosts. The letter arrived 3 days later, slipped into the mailbox among flyers for pizza and lawn care. Dad's handwriting on the envelope, no return address. I waited until Lily was asleep, then sat on the porch swing with a glass of tea and opened it under the glow of the bug light. The paper was heavy, the kind he used for board resolutions, the ink steady despite the tremor I knew lived in his hand now. I wrote this the night before I left, sealed it, and told Caldwell to deliver only if you ever took the reins. You were always enough. Not the spare, not the practical one, not the daughter who fixed things. Enough. The money, the properties, the truth. None of it matters if you don't believe that. Raise Lily to know her worth comes from inside, not from tables or trusts or blood that failed her. I'll visit when the dust settles, bring the tire swing, stay as long as you'll have me. Until then, live loud. Dad. I read it twice then, a third time, the swing creaking beneath me like an old friend. The words settled in my chest, warm and solid, a foundation stronger than any estate. I folded the letter and tucked it into the cedar chest beside Lily's first lock of hair. The night was quiet except for crickets, and the occasional car on the distant highway, a soundtrack to a life unburdened. We had changed our phones, sold the house, crossed 3 states, burned the photographs, chosen a school with a turret. The Harpers were a footnote now, a cautionary tale told in whispers at Charlotte Garden parties. Lily woke each morning to birdsong and the smell of coffee, her laughter filling rooms that had never known our name. I watched her swing higher than the porch roof, her hair a banner against the Tennessee sky, and felt the last chain fall away. Some endings aren't endings at all. The letter from Dad stayed folded in the cedar chest, its words a quiet heartbeat beneath the rhythm of our new days. The Tennessee sun rose warmer than Charlotte's ever had, spilling gold across the porch swing where Lily practiced cartwheels on the grass, and I sipped coffee strong enough to anchor me. Months slipped by in a blur of firsts, Lily's initial day at the turreted school where she walked in clutching a lunchbox painted with constellations. My inaugural freelance contract managing portfolios from a desk that overlooked a maple turning scarlet.
the Saturday market where we bought peaches so ripe the juice ran down our chins. The town embraced us without questions, neighbors waving from porches, the librarian slipping Lily extra bookmarks shaped like owls. We were simply the new family on Maple Street, no footnotes required. I found my voice in the shelter's places with cinder block walls and bulletin boards crowded with hope. The first invitation came from a director who had seen the leaked video and recognized something redeemable in the wreckage. I spoke on Tuesday evenings after Lily's homework was done, and the dishes stacked in the drainer. The women sat on folding chairs, some with infants asleep on their shoulders, others with bruises fading like old ink. I told them about the night I walked out, about the smartwatch files, about the forged signatures that nearly cost me everything. I told them the part that mattered most, that leaving was not surrender, but strategy, that silence could be a weapon when wielded with precision. They leaned forward, eyes fierce with recognition, and when I finished, they asked questions that cut to the bone. How do you know when to forgive? How do you teach a child to trust again? I answered honestly, slowly, deliberately, on your own terms. Lily thrived in ways that made my chest ache with gratitude. She joined the science club, built a volcano that erupted purple foam across the cafeteria, and came home with a certificate for most creative hypothesis. Her teacher sent emails praising her empathy, how she noticed when a classmate sat alone and invited them to her table. At night, she read under the covers with a flashlight. The smartwatch now just a timepiece on her nightstand, its recordings archived and silent. She asked about Charlotte only once, tracing the state line on a map with her finger. Do Grandma and Aunt Claire miss us? I told her the truth. Some people miss what they lost, but not enough to change. She nodded, satisfied, and turned the page. News of the old life arrived in fragments delivered by Dad during his monthly visits, with the tire swing strapped to his truck like a promise kept. Claire's gallery filed. Chapter 7: The Chelsea space shuttered, the Miami penthouse sold at auction to cover debts. Mom sold the estate to a developer who planned condominiums, moved into a one-bedroom condo near the country club, and attended bridge games where no one mentioned the past. Dad showed me the bankruptcy notice, the real estate listing, the society page photo of Mom alone at a charity luncheon. They're breathing, he said, but not living. I felt no triumph, only the dull recognition that consequences have their own geography. The shelters became my legacy, a circuit of rooms where women rebuilt from ash. I spoke in church basements in Knoxville, in community centers in Chattanooga, always ending with the same line: I forgive, but I don't return. The phrase started as armor, became mantra, then truth. Forgiveness was not reunion. It was release. I released Mom from the expectation of grandmotherly warmth, Claire from the myth of sisterhood, the Harper name from its chokehold on my future. The women nodded, some crying, some taking notes on napkins. One left a drawing on the sign-in sheet, a woman walking away from a burning house, a child's hand in hers, the flames spelling freedom in curling script. Lily's 10th-and-a-half birthday fell on a Thursday, and we celebrated with a picnic at the duck pond. Chocolate cake balanced on a checkered blanket. Dad arrived with a new swing, this one carved from oak, and hung it from the maple while Lily directed like a foreman. She swung higher than the roofline, hair streaming, laughter bright enough to rival the sun. I watched from the porch, Dad beside me, his hand on my shoulder, steady as the tree. You built this, he said. I knew he meant more than the house, the swing, the life. I meant the boundaries, the peace, the space where Lily could grow without the shadow of old expectations. That night after Dad left and Lily slept with cake crumbs on her pillow, I stood on the porch and looked at the stars scattered like spilled salt. The shelters had taught me that healing is not linear, that some wounds scar and some reopen, but that forward motion is its own grace. I had forgiven the slap, the forgery, the lies, not for their sake but for mine, for Lily's, for the women who would hear my story and choose their own doors. The past was a closed book, its pages brittle, its ending written in ash. Because the next chapter, it's about forgiveness on my terms. The chandelier glittered like cold judgment over the mahogany table,
as my sister's hand cracked across my 10-year-old daughter's cheek. A single drop of lobster bisque slid down Lily's trembling lip, mixing with the red welt blooming on her skin. My mother dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and said nothing. My father stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. 20 relatives froze mid-bite. I felt the room tilt. 10 years of swallowed insults of being the lesser daughter of watching Claire get the praise while I raised the child she abandoned, ignited in that slap. I stood so fast the chair screamed against marble. "Touch her again," I whispered, voice low enough to slice steel, and you'll lose more than your pride. I took Lily's hand and walked out. No slammed doors, just the soft click that ended a lifetime. In the car, I opened the offshore app I'd hidden for 6 years. One tap. $15 million, my silent 51% of the family trust vanished from their reach. By midnight, 109 missed calls lit my screen like fireworks. They thought I was broke. They thought I was broken. Keep watching. Because the man they buried 6 months ago isn't dead. The child they shamed is holding the evidence and the fortune they're screaming over. It was never theirs. What happens when a mother finally stops apologizing and starts collecting? Stay until the end for 3 twists that will leave you gasping and the sweetest revenge you'll ever taste. If this story of betrayal, hidden power, and unbreakable love has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss a single upload. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have walked out that night or waited for the perfect strike? Have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything? Share your stories below. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else find their strength. Let's keep this conversation going because every story shared is a step toward healing.